Panelists. In the spirit of keeping this as interactive and participatory as possible, at that point I would like to go to audience, first round of audience questions. After that I will continue with the panelists asking them a round of questions, and we'll turn back to audience questions again after that. So without much ado, can you see my slides there? Or
There's there, and I can click.
Yeah, could you click? Yeah. Okay, so what I wanted to start there is, as I said, a little bit of context setting. Meet Adiz and Aisha. They're 3 years old, all of three, adorable, and the year is 2019. But believe it or not, these kids have had no contact with technology. They go to a preschool where it would be a blessing if the lights were on 2 days a week. The teacher barely has any kind of training in pedagogy or teaching, and the type of learning is learning by rote. So these kids will get some form of education, but do you think they'd really be competitive in jobs, which, as we know, in the fourth industrial revolution, haven't even been invented yet? So consider the plight of these kids as we go through the journey of today's presentation. Now, I find that the theme of today's session closely aligns to which SDG? Can someone tell me?
4.
SDG 4. Would anyone want to take a stab at what that describes?
Quality education.
Quality education, inclusive and equitable education for all kids and youth around the globe. Now, by 2030, obviously. But, you know, this could be possible if we're not dealing with the challenges that we are. Next slide, please. So let's take a reality check. Globally, 53% of children in low and middle income countries cannot read or understand a simple story by age 10. Now, we had our World Bank IMF annual meetings just last month, and our president, Dr. David Malpass, coined a new term called learning poverty, and basically set a target last week at the annual meetings to reduce this by half, if possible. So, as I said, 53% of children in low and middle income countries can't read or write or comprehend a single story. Now, this number goes up exponentially in sub-Saharan Africa to 90% of the kids not being able to. Other statistics to note are that over 260 million kids, roughly 20%, between the age of 6 and 17 are out of school. And again, this percentage increases by 33% in less developed countries, and also what at the World Bank and in development communities we call FCV, which is fragile and conflict-affected countries. 168 million kids are child laborers between the age of 5 and 17, and that's one of the main reasons why they're out of school. 25 million kids will never go to school, and there's a shortage of almost 20 million teachers in remote areas that need upskilling and reskilling and so on. This is in addition to the enormous number of teachers globally who need reskilling and upskilling in any case. So these numbers are daunting. However, there is hope through multiple channels. First, research indicates that for every dollar spent invested in education, it translates to 10 million in economic growth. And even more importantly, equitable access to quality education could potentially help raise a country's GDP by 23%. So these are some parameters of hope. Yeah. I also wanted to add that the President talked about learning poverty, and this slide actually, it's modified from the Gates Foundation's Goalpost report. But this slide takes you through an analogy of life being a journey, and the 3 scales show you the different set of challenges or the different journeys that a child in the richest country, so the top line talks about a boy born in a developed country. The second scale shows you a girl born in a developed country, and the third shows you the rather hard obstacles a child in Sahel, Africa, faces, ranging from the constraints can range from geography, remote geographies, to, of course, gender, to the uncertainties of climate change and disaster risk and pandemics and epidemics, and also lack of very basic facilities and services. Each of these, for the child in Sahel, each of these obstacles makes it harder to benefit from a quality educational experience, and this explains why so many kids are out of schools and the education benefits are yet to be realized. So the point being that gaining access to SDG 4, which is quality, inclusive, and equitable education, can break down the cycles of poverty, boost economic growth, reduce gender inequalities, and increase really job and employment opportunities for these kids. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in this slide, what I want to say is that many of these challenges can be mitigated, or at least we can try to do so, by using education technology, innovative pedagogy, and smart partnerships to help us overcome these hurdles. But in order to do that, I think we need a methodological framework that is evidence-based, and what are the key components or the key components that can lead to successful outcomes. So I'll talk through very quickly each of these, if I may, each of these. So the first one is around policy, and to have sustainable impact, we must shift from simply disseminating devices to designing and maintaining learning ecosystems, including national edtech agencies that encourage and promote local production, maintenance, and update of content. This is very critical, and these are all based on our lessons learned with having introduced edtech in developing countries over the last 15 years or so. Digital media outreach and engagement in education, including social media, is critical, as also education policy, edtech policy, regulatory frameworks that include building national capacities related to science, technology, and innovation. Moving on, infrastructure. A noticeable general trend that is emerging is the gradual shift from discussions about the importance of access to technology to a greater concern around the potential differential impacts of the access. So meaning equitable access and eliminating the inequalities. And needless to say, the following are on top of mind of policymakers, using cloud data centers in education, connecting rural schools to learning and learning content, edtech devices, and so on. The third one should be of no surprise, mobile. In the early years, the desktop was still the king and the laptop was ascendant. Today, discussions largely center around mobile devices like tablets and increasingly phones as a powerful enabler to tackle the SDG challenges we mentioned, and particularly play a significant role in improving access, affordability, and quality of education. What I'd like to say here is that we now need to think about mobile and mobile operators in conjunction with edtech startups to create gateways to enhance learning. Teacher enablement and pedagogy. So the importance of teacher enablement is high on the agenda, and it's a myth if you say that edtech will replace teachers, because that is definitely not the case. Typically in edtech operations that I've seen, teachers are marginalized, and in many edtech initiatives, we know teaching quality constitutes one of the major obstacles to learning, especially in under-resourced environments. So this should be top of mind, but also it's not about taking textbooks and face-to-face lectures and putting them online. We have to look at what the media does best, the medium, the ed-tech media, delivery mechanism, what have you, and ensure that we leverage the strengths and are aware of the limitations of each media. And sometimes it's the blend that works the best. Next point is around educational content and learning resources. Content is the foundation, and therefore cloud-based solutions founded on open source operating systems and open source learning management systems is essential to help us build a storefront for the wealth of content. But the critical component here is that the content needs to blend both local and global content. I've seen too often systems and devices loaded with content from Europe and the US, which has some interest for the first few months and then they gather dust. So there has to be, in conjunction with national education portals, digital learning resources, textbooks that are produced locally, and through local producers like universities, publishers, authors. And yes, we need to consider an offline-online model to make this work. I mean, regularly at the World Bank, I run the learning ecosystem called the Open Learning Campus, which we launched about 10 years ago, and it's 7 years ago, and it's largely for policymakers and practitioners. But today, I'm very positively surprised that 30% of our 3 to 4 million learners every year come from Africa. So definitely the bandwidth is improving, devices, I mean, platforms like edX and Coursera have improved compression techniques. So, you know, it was not, access is not a huge problem due to bandwidth. It was about 10 years ago, but still offline, online access helps us in really resourced constrained situation. The learning methodologies and tools, I mean, it's not a one-size-fits-all. We need to reimagine, the pedagogy, as I said, and think through what are the right tools for the right audiences and the right set of objectives and outcomes you're looking for. The way I look at it, not every learning opportunity or initiative is a MOOC. You know, MOOCs are good for large awareness raising, but self-directed e-courses, blended courses with face-to-face or virtually facilitated e-courses may be better for skills building and so on. So we have to look at, we need instructional designers and learning architects to help map what we're trying to do for whom and how we do it. So numerous countries around the world, as I see in the loans that the World Bank gives out, are preparing to significantly increase their investments in the use of education technology to achieve SDG 4. So how might they measure what they're doing, and what value might there be in being able to compare what they measure and benchmark it to other countries, like India could benchmark it with other South Asian countries, Vietnam with East Asian countries, or globally. So I think through the alliance of through the Global Alliance to Monitor Learning, which is a UN initiative, GAML, they're working with countries, assessment agencies, donors, and civil society groups to take a very harmonized approach to data collection, setting benchmark, and enhancing quality controls. So it's going to be important that we don't reinvent the wheel on data and measurement, but use these harmonized approaches to measure ourselves and our initiatives. Of course, last few points is funding is important. Needless to say, costing for smart educational technology, procurement of learning content and modules, thinking about financing edtech startups and incubators, as well as the ability to enable mobile financing is important. And The other key here I want to mention, and as our panelists will be addressing as well, the different target groups that we reach out to. So of course you have the early childhood, higher ed, lifelong learning, but special ed becomes important, and in today's context as well, refugee training, as well as the community engagement. So these are all the target audiences that we need to be providing equitable and affordable services to. And last point, I think it's time to explore new partnerships. In order to address the SDG challenges, we need to bring together partners from public, private organizations working together to address the challenge of digital education. And this includes governments, education sector, technology companies, startups, the international development organizations like the World Bank and so on, both bilaterals and multilaterals. So key is we have to explore and pilot and figure out what are the best types of partnerships will work in what context. So that was the framing that I wanted to set. I want to add a few more thoughts for you to think through as you listen to our key panelists here. Some questions to ponder. How can we identify and scale and accelerate effective and culturally appropriate EdTech to promote better learning outcomes as well as greater equity and inclusivity? How should we be designing our schools, our colleges differently to accommodate the use of these new technologies? And which educational technology interventions present the greatest value for money and social return on investment? So with that, I will turn to Dr. Banerjee, our first panelist. Okay,
Fine.
let's start with Dr. Banerjee.
Okay.
She's a brief introduction again. She's Pro-Vice Chancellor of Amity University in Haryana, India. A PhD. She has over 25 years of experience in research, teaching, consulting, and training. She's a life coach and thought to be a leader and author of The Power of Positivity. A recipient of the prestigious 2018 Green Build Leadership Award, she has pioneered skills initiatives at the university. And her presentation is going to be about India as an emerging economic and educational power, and how she built up the skills initiative in her current institution. So over to you.
I think that my slides might be next, though.
Okay, because, so did you want to,
Yes.
when I
think-
talked
I think-
earlier,
yes.
that's,
So I think you have to, we have to
go
start
with this
with
order because that's
because
the
the
order
slides have been set.
that's not the order we discussed just a few minutes ago, but that's fine. So remember, Dr. Banerjee will come back on soon. So let me turn to Terry Neal, Dr. Terry Neal, who brings a wide range of experience in flexible and technical as well as vocational education, TVET, in New Zealand as well as around the world. She has held various management roles in institutes of technology, industry training organizations, and managed e-learning and capacity building projects, New Zealand and globally. So her presentation is going to introduce 3 of Commonwealth of Learning's initiative through which they're tapping talent in emerging economies. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Neal.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'm from the Commonwealth of Learning, an intergovernmental organisation that works in the 49 developing countries of the Commonwealth, so close to a third of the world's population. And our focus is using open and distance learning and technologies to improve and expand access to quality education and training. So my role is I'm responsible for our technical and vocational skills development initiative. I'm going to talk very briefly about 3 initiatives at COLE where we're tapping into the, I guess you could call the grassroots talent, the people affected by the learning poverty that Sheila and Jeff have already referred to. And those are in the emerging economies across Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. The first example is lifelong learning for farmers. So we work through NGOs with groups of farmers in developing countries in 3 ways. The first is social inclusion. So we form self-help groups of farmers, and they have an agreed goal to meet an identified market need for agricultural produce. The second way we work with them is extension or learning. So they get continuous learning using audio messages and text messages via the farmers' mobile phones. So these aren't smartphones, these are whatever we call the phones before smartphones, to build their technical and financial literacy skills so they can produce food for themselves and also increase their income. We also focus on this happening in an environmentally friendly way. The third way we help them work with them is financial inclusion. So the self-help groups work together to save, and to save what we would think of as very small amounts of money, but that together they can build enough that they can then access credit through financial institutions. So the model has proven to be cost effective, with studies showing that every dollar invested in the program yields $9 worth of social returns. Financial institutions earn 8 times more income from L3F participants, and the cost of using ODL to build capacity is 6 times lower than conventional face-to-face training. In 2006, Cole first started this model, relatively small, testing and proving it, with about 2,000 learners over the first 3 years, 50,000 in the next 3 years, 250,000 in the next 3 years, and the next 3 years is targeting over 1 million. The model also started with proving it and gathering the evidence, and then influencing governments, picking up on the policy perspective that Sheila referred to, rather than influencing governments at the beginning. So it was kind of a bottom-up gather evidence model. In the picture there you can see Sunita from India. So she learned about dairy farming and studied a year-long intensive business support program, which included marketing and supply chain management. This enabled her and the rest of her group to get a loan worth 20,000 rupees. She was able to purchase 2 buffaloes, which she rears along with farming activities. Her monthly income went up 3-fold from 2,000 to 6,000 rupees. How much is that in US dollars? Does anyone?
Okay. How much?
6,000?
Probably under $100.
Yeah, $100.
Under $100,
Maybe
yes.
$75.
Yeah.
But for her, triple the income. Now she can provide good quality education, healthcare, and other required facilities for her children. The second example is Girls Inspire. So we've been working with girls in rural communities in Asia and Africa with a focus on reaching the unreached and also preventing early childhood forced marriages. So the 3 elements in this model are identifying community partners with whom we work. They then survey the community and employers to understand local skill gaps and establish safe educational spaces to build capability in technical, financial and life skills, using a mixture of distance learning and practical skills development. And then the third part is linking the woman to the labour market and to finance. So you can see some similarities with the Farmers Project. The project also runs sensitisation activities with the community to change their perceptions of women and women's education. And evaluation of one project with 25,000 girls showed that before the project, 90% believed they lacked the skills to find a job. But after the project, 82% believed they now had the skills to get a job. And the number who believed they had access to economic opportunities increased from 24 to 96%. In 3 years, this initiative has reached nearly 500,000 community members, established 500 safe learning environments, trained 75,000 women and girls, and nearly 15,000 women and girls now have sources of income generation. In the picture you can see Nurnaha, an 18-year-old from Sawujpara village in Bangladesh. So she has 2 sisters and 1 brother, and both her sisters were married off at a young age. Her father is a farmer and her mother a housewife, and they could not afford her educational expenses. Through the project, she studied a 3-month course learning how to make fashion garments. She wanted to start her own business, but had no startup capital. She managed to save some money, and her brother also contributed some, but it was not enough to buy a sewing machine. Project advisors helped her apply for a microloan, and she was able to buy a sewing machine and materials and start her own business selling clothes to her neighbours. Later, she talked to her trainer, who suggested that she start an online business using Facebook. She did more training and set up a Facebook page using her mobile phone to receive orders from other villagers. Next, she included other girls who'd also been trained through the project in her business. Now her monthly income is around $100, and she can afford to go back to school. Her family members are very happy and are encouraging her to expand her business so that she can have her own shop in the local market. She is economically and socially empowered and self-reliant. The last initiative I want to talk about is Skills in Demand, a new approach that is in the test and prove phase of model development. I was in Africa last month, launching 4 projects. It has similarities to the other 2, but its focus is on awarding formal qualifications. Our partners there are formal TVET institutes who have a local industry partner, some from the formal sector and some from the informal sector. The training goes to where learners are in the workplace, recognising their prior learning, filling gaps in theory using distance learning via smartphones, and gaps in practical skills through having clearly defined occupational standards and also modernising technology where necessary, and then assessing the competence and awarding the formal qualifications. There is also support to improve business skills and access finance. The gentleman in the picture is Donald, an auto mechanic who is the chairman of the Ghana National Association of Garages in Kumasi, an association of 100 master craftspersons and 500 apprentices who fix cars in Kumasi. The group is in the process of negotiating to purchase land so that they can move from the land they are renting and invest in infrastructure to grow their business. They have entered into an agreement with our local technical university partner to develop their technical and business skills and certify their members, starting with the master craftsmen running their association. Donald has a certificate, but the others don't. After certification, they hope that some will be able to go and work in the formal sector, some will stay and grow their business, and some will set up new businesses, all keeping the tradition of training others. While most master apprentices have master craftsmen have 4 or 5 apprentices, right now Donald is training 17 apprentices. Not because he needs that many workers, but because he doesn't want to see youth without a future. He doesn't charge all of them the small fee for apprenticeship training. He gives them food, and some of them sleep on site in the makeshift tool shed because they have no parents or sponsors to provide a home for them. These apprentices are not working in this apprentice environment because this was their first choice. They are all part of this learning poverty cycle where they don't have as many choices as other people, and so they take this option. So from the brief overview, you can see common elements across these 3 initiatives, all leading to improved livelihoods for thousands of learners. I'm going to stand up because I thought I would be able to read this while I was talking. I think the key thing is that it's not just about training, it's not just about getting pieces of paper, it's actually the end-to-end thinking about how to make a difference in people's lives. And linked to that is thinking about the money part, because people have skills, but they also need capital. taking learning to where people are, and I think everyone in this room is very committed to that. Use of OER and the mobile phones, as Sheila talked about. And then this smart partnerships. You know, it's bringing together different groups, whether it's NGOs and community groups or the formal TVET institutions. And I talk about investing in relationships, not infrastructure. And then the last point is this replicable, but you still have to do the context-specific stuff. So we had the Lifelong Learning for Farmers was created in India, but when we took it to Africa, we had to rethink some of the specifics, even though the underlying principles remain the same. So no simple answers, but lots of hope. So yeah, we're proving the benefits of ODL and these sorts of principles for thousands of learners across these 3 initiatives, plus some other things. Thank you.
Let's give a round of applause. Thank you, Dr. Neal. These were powerful stories that illustrated the use of EdTech, not only to improve access, but to connect them to job opportunities for the poor and the vulnerable. I now turn to Dr. Banerjee, who will probably talk about more the urban experience of having set up and managing and growing Amity University, which is one of the large universities in India.
Okay. Thank you, Sheila. Very good morning to all. I think I'm very happy to be here, and thank you, Jeff, for inviting me. Well, I have a fascination for dates. And today being the 14th of November, in India we celebrate Children's Day. And where we concentrate a lot on the awareness, helping children to understand their rights, and definitely look at creating a better world for them. So it's indeed well planned. For me, I feel very happy that I could be here. And I'm taking this opportunity to be a great learning opportunity as well, because I'm going to meet people around here with lots of different views. And actually to tell you that if you're looking at the world ahead of us, it's almost like we are sitting here, we can't see the slide. Similarly, we don't know what's going to unfold, but we really know how we are going, where we are going. So basically that would be one of my focus today that I thought I'm going to leave it with you all. And to do that, if you look at India per se, you know we are the largest democracy with 1.3 billion population. So if you're looking at growth, if you're looking at what needs to be done, the focus could be India. So if you do things right there, possibly that you can do a lot of things that can be taken as best practices, as I think Terry already mentioned about a couple of them that they have already invested on. Second, it's the largest youth population in the world. So we are not only looking at it as population, but it is a vast talent pool. So across most of the countries, wherever you go, you look at the airports, you're going to find a lot of youthful talent moving from here and there. The best of these students from our universities are picked up by the best universities across the world. So I think that is another very positive thing that is going on in India. Then you look at a progressive developmental policies by the government, a dynamic government policies with focus on development for all, and we call it Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, where we are talking about how you can create equal opportunities, how there could be right kind of platform where people are able to grow. So definitely that would involve resources, planning, implementation, and getting the right kind of brains together. So all of that come part of the policies. And finally, innovation and entrepreneurial hub. If you look at the 10th companies that are coming up as entrepreneurial ventures, at least 2 among them or 3 among them would be Indian companies. So we are seeing a lot of India as also an entrepreneurship hub. We are also looking at, if you look at the 3 Asian countries, if you look at the world innovation, you will find at least 3 of the countries are in Asia. So that way also, if you see a lot of innovation that is coming up, so there is something also right that's going on in the early education in India. So I wanted to also bring you the happy pictures that's going on, where you see that a good kind of early education scenario. Yes, we have a bigger problem of many schools where there are dropout rates are high. So that is another place that we need to plug and play. Then the final thing that on this I want to leave you with is innovation. As I mentioned, it is also the economy in the world where we are able to see that some of the best practices that we can pick up from here and take it to the different parts of the world. And if you add that to the other BRICS countries, it's about almost 50% population. So we possibly can look at some of the initiatives that can be drawn out from there. Then if you see that whatever, I think Terry and Sheila discussed, it is also important to see that what is the kind of curriculum design which will give us a more sustainability in terms of less dropout rates, what kind of teaching learning practices both in schools and colleges will become important. So I have published this as a 6C model. I thought at least I'll give you a glimpse of the model here. I've worked on a European Union project which is focused a lot on the capacity building. And here some of the C's which are very important in curriculum, especially both in school and college education, or when we're looking at open learning, are we focusing a lot on the choices that you give to your students in terms of how they can possibly design their own career path? What is the kind of team learning and collaboration which are there? So the choice, collaboration, communication is in terms of use of the technology, which has already been pointed out. How are we really using the technology form, the whole environment that we have? For example, if you look at, all right, there are MOOCs and other things available, but what is the kind of, like I think Terry and I think Sheila mentioned a lot on the mobile technology, and at the cheapest solutions, how certain initiatives can be brought through mobile technology to children in schools was also would be a very interesting area. Then we talked about when we look at the ability to handle change, the chaos around us, which I think we have to learn it right from your childhood. So learning to transform fast. So I think touch, team and transformation for me will find very important areas to create this kind of an ecosystem where there is better learning. So we need to focus a lot on the curriculum that we design and how it is implemented. To do that, we would definitely need the right kind of faculty and teachers, helping them to learn and helping them to become the right mentors for the children around them. So I think these are some of the 6C model. It can be used in different platforms, both in early education as well in higher education. Now, one of the aspects that I also want to focus on is basically how do you empower the youth. So I would like to say, because I can't see it from here, I'll just give me a minute. So on one side, it is the government policies, it are world bodies which are working towards a progressive growth. I would also like to say that is there an aspiration deficit, or are something happening where we are not focusing on the children or on the youth themselves? They can themselves think of what are the best things that they can do for their own growth. So here I want to say that I have worked a lot on the area of beyond your emotional intelligence and IQ. I have worked on a very interesting area called the optimistic intelligence, which is primarily the kind of attitude formation that the children can be trained on. And the good news is, yes, attitude can be learned and developed. So I'm talking about creating that seventh sense in youth so that they are ready to create a pathway, design their own pathway for a success in their lives. Also, if we are looking at empowering and holistic development, we cannot look at only education as one of the areas. We have to look at the other areas like their, the social empowerment that they need to get, the kind of health and other facilities that they are exposed to, their environment, their family environment, the political environment, the geopolitical environment. I think countries today are uniting to work together even in that area. So there is a need for that kind of diplomacy, which I think it's the future. And finally, I think that through the right focus on the curriculum design and development, looking at the micro initiatives in schools and colleges, coming together as a league to get into the best practices, we can create a better future for the students in schools. And finally, I think through that, we would be able to design a sustainable world for them. Time has come that it's the need of the hour that such topics are chosen in such forums is also, it's a fact that it is the need of the hour. Countries have decided on. So I personally view it as a very big opportunity that today exists, and there is need for technological companies, there is need for higher learning institutions to come together and collaborate and create a more sustainable world. And at the end, I'll just like to play a small video of an initiative that was created by my students some time back. We call it Social Awareness Program. So thank you for the help. Shall I click it? Okay.
We have some help on the way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
How many educational technologists does it take?
Exactly, exactly.
As we speak, I just received this today. I couldn't be present. I got this award in the morning, on 14th itself today.
Turn on my glasses for a second.
Maybe we can. It's an award on contribution in school education where this model was picked up and all.
So maybe you could talk while we get it. Apparently, this is just-in-time learning. Dr. Banerjee has received an award on one of her projects. So give us a brief overview.
Yeah,
while
thank
we
you
get
very much. And as we speak, I couldn't be there in person, but I have a photograph which has come to me. The award that I received on education and excellence, where contribution, her excellence award on optimism and happiness for her valuable services and contribution to the promotion of school psychology. So they have implemented some of my models, and that's received from the, there is an association of school psychology association in India, quite well. So that's what I thought.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And that's fine, less voice over anyway. So these are my students who have gone this. Integration from school to higher education, where the students of higher education reach out to the schools around their vicinity to help and make a difference in their lives. Thank you.
Is it a little
Yeah?
bit longer, or is it?
No, it's
coming
done.
to-
It's
okay.
getting over. Yeah. It's about 30 seconds more, but we can close it if there's. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Banerjee, for that very interesting presentation. I think it's half the battle when you change attitude and have a positive outlook. And I think the idea of starting young is very effective, because one of the challenges I've seen time and time again in as we manage some of the World Bank education project when you're dealing with adults is behavior change. And behavior change is a huge challenge, and it is something that takes a longer term intervention of 3 to 5 years. So I think starting young to develop some of these skills, and especially the positive attitude, is a huge step in the right direction. So moving along to the next presenter, panelist, welcome Dr. Smah.
Thank you.
He's the sociology professor and director of Students' Industrial Work Experience Scheme at the National Open University of Nigeria in Abuja, and also he is the industrial liaison officer of the Noun World Bank assisted Africa Center of Excellence project. So over to you, Dr. Sam, to tell us about this initiative, what's working well, what are some of the challenges, and what are your future plans?
Right, thank you very much, Sheila. Thank you, Jeff, for having me. I'd like to start by saying that there's a huge skills gap in Nigeria, and perhaps I need to go close to the screen. I can see from here. Thank you. This huge gap is created by a number of challenges. First of all, between the 90s and the early 2000s, there was a process of reforms in higher education. I think it was an African experience. But out of the processes and all the things that happened in terms of reforms, in terms of marketization of courses, cuts in funding of higher education in particular, there was a misstep, and that misstep was the fact that universities and governments did not actually prepare for the eventual state where we are. So many things were left undocumented, and so many things were not really taken care of. And so this huge skills gap that exists arises from the very challenges that the conventional university systems and other higher education institutions have. And those challenges have to do with space, have to do with how many of these children get into the university or polytechnics and colleges of education. I think that there was and there is a continuous rise in the number of children who want to enter the university. Of course, in Nigeria and generally in Africa, the significance of the university certificate is very, very high. So everybody wants to get to the university. Everybody has to get a university certificate, and that is the push. And that is the direction. That is the course of action. For you to have been said to have really, really read, then you have to go to the university. Now, this year alone, there was about 1.8 million children who sat for the university common entrance exam. Of course, the fallout has always been that over the last 10 years, there are processes of admissions that would never really go beyond 30%. And so you're having something like just about 450,000 of these students eventually getting spaces in the university. So that has created the scenario where the ODL education platforms and services in universities become very necessary because the balance of those who couldn't get into the universities remain out there, and they remain struggling in order to be able to get admission next time. Some have written these exams quite a number of years, number of times, to be able to get into the university. Now, how do we really address these issues to achieve what technology is supposed to be used? Now, the SG4 states that all governments and all institutions to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. And I think then that the African response has dramatically shifted attention. And this response has to do with the establishment of virtual universities. National Open University of Nigeria is key here as an example because of the opportunities that this has created. So I think that we are in a new age, and this age has to do with the crisis associated with the reforms, which now gives us opportunities for the online distance e-learning opportunities. Now, the ultimatum, which I believe governments need to set, is to lead to how fast and how equitable and how quickly can we attain the level where we use technology, we use the ODL, the OER, and MOOCs, and other instruments to fast-track learning. Because the huge number of these students that exist out there are not able to get into the universities. So this becomes an imperative that has to be actually accomplished. So the National Open University of Nigeria, for example, which is the largest university in the West African sub-region, has about 500,000 students, most of whom are very, very active. How has the National Open University of Nigeria carried on its mission of providing an alternative to conventional learning? First, that it has subsystems or units which are facilitating this learning, mounting up of online courses, and of course, creating platforms for exams, creating platforms for test taking, creating platforms for community learning, and so the university's achievements have been sustained from its established institutions or sub-institutions like the NETRODA, which has its concern with developing the OER systems and resources. Of course, this is in collaboration with the Commonwealth of Learning, and this is very key contribution to ensuring that there is access, and then it also develops the MOOCs to ensure massive access to learning opportunities. Then, of course, like Sheila has said, the World Bank has assisted our university because we are one of the 10 new ACEs by establishing the Technology Enhanced Learning Center. And this center is wholly digitalized. We are hoping to establish online courses, particularly on artificial learning, and also computer sciences and management information system. This system, or these programs are at the postgraduate level. Of course, we have some short courses that could give opportunities to people out there who are not yet degree holders. Then, of course, there is the Now Learning Content Management System. And this initiative came in on board this year, and its main responsibilities develop platforms and systems to ensure that learning takes place through transformation of course content into audio visuals and other tools which will facilitate access to learning, particularly at various levels and the communities. Of course, we have about 78 learning centers across Nigeria, including Niger Republic. There is a Now Study Center there. So these instruments that the Now authorities have established enhances access, even in rural areas where we have community study centers. We also have specialized study centers for the military, for the police, and several other paramilitary agencies. Now, where I directly fit in here, where we are leveraging technology to connect knowledge with skills, is through the National Open University SIWES. SIWES here is Students Industrial Work Experience Scheme. Now, this scheme facilitates students' placement in various organizations while they are still on. In America, I think it's something very close to holiday boot camps. Here, in our case, we facilitate students' placement in industries, just like we also are planning internship for the ESTEL, which is the Centers of Excellence on Technology Enhanced Learning. Now, SIWES actually has a new a system which we developed and launched in July this year. Now, this system ensures that students monitoring during their internship, during their what we call the industrial experience period of 6 months, we monitor them online. It reduces the cost of supervision to a very minimal level. It facilitates interactions with industry supervisors. Then the university supervisors also have some level of contact with the students. But this is online. This is based on the system that is developed by our learning content management system. Now, this opportunity has created a large market for students to be able to lay their hands, to be able to transform the theories into practical experiences in the workplace. And this is a huge step that has come to replace scenarios of students being disconnected from their fields of study. So a student reading microbiology, for example, will need to have access to some laboratories. And at the National Open University, where we have even things like mobile laboratories that facilitate students' experiences in the conduct of laboratory practicals, this, again, has been aided by the system that we have put in place. So over 58,000 students have had this experience over the last 5 years. I think that the future is here. And this is very key because of the real issues that we have in Nigeria and lots of other African countries, where students who need skills and where even the students who are already admitted in the universities need to also have practical hands-on experiences. This period that we're in has marked a major departure from the system that we have. Now, we have 174 universities in Nigeria, largely driven by the private sector. The huge number of students that are unable to get admission, they have alternative, and this alternative is in the OER system, is in the MOOC system, and it is in developing sustainable course materials, course content, both at the national and the international level, to allow for an interface between students and between institutions to facilitate access to learning and also access to skilled jobs. We have come also to a point where human literacy must take the foremost place. Human literacy must also be combined with data literacy and must also be combined with technology literacy. This is the increasing advantage that the Now system has. This is the increasing advantage that other virtual universities have around the world. And there is need to, therefore, pursue this with the vigor that is required. The government policies should really address the gaps that exist between rural areas, between the urban slums and other places that need to have access to the required technology that will enhance education and learning. I also think that from what we know, leadership by the young people is very vital here, because young people are likely to have had access to one form of technology or the other. So in various establishments and organizations, even in government, I propose that youth should take leadership positions, because with that, the change that is needed, the processes of transformation from analog learning to ICT-oriented learning will be faster. Now, but we have challenges. And these challenges, they are real, and they have to do with broadband, bandwidth, and all of this have been kind of shaped by lack of electricity, the internet connectivity and penetration. Even in Africa, largely, is very still low, and there is need to handle this issue here with all the resources that we have. So the process of getting to sustain the learning and to also to facilitate access to a larger population of students and for citizens who need skilled jobs and all of those resources in contemporary time, perhaps in the global south, in the rural areas, low-income populations, among women and out-of-school children. Of course, you know, out-of-school children is a big phenomenon in Africa, and Nigeria is taking the lead in that. So this is very important to address the gaps. If we must show up the level where we can facilitate access to learning, access to jobs, then the issues of broadband and all of those other technically related matters needs to be addressed. The other is the economic issues that have to do with resources. There will never really be enough resources anytime, but we need to, governments need to establish the clear conscience and clear understanding that this is vital. If the conventional system of learning is not actually providing solutions to skills development, then the alternative needs to be properly invested in, and resources need to be made available. We have social challenges, and this has to do with unwillingness to use other resources developed by some people, issues, again, that have to do with legal issues of copyright, which I think, again, that the Creative Commons platforms and laws can actually come to the rescue by leading to the moment where resources and all the challenges connected with them can be made more available. I believe that the entirety of the experiences in Nigeria, which is being shared by other African countries and other emerging economies around the world, prove that we can actually make a difference. If the intention is, and which is what I believe is if the intention is to ensure access to learning, to ensure productivity, to ensure connections with opportunities that exist, then we need to take the issues of connected learning very seriously and to make the resources available for them. Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you, Dr. Small, for sharing with us the experiences of the Nigerian Open National University and the Skills Initiative. Before we turn to the panelists and dig a little deeper on some of these issues, I'd like to turn to the audience to see if you have any questions at this point for any of us or anything you've heard this morning. Please go ahead. Is there a mic? Yes, thank you. Good to introduce yourself and state
Good
your
morning. My
question.
name is Larita Watson, and I am the founder of Mindcrat. And I said two panelists, the last two, talked about student empowerment. That's what I kept hearing. And I'm just like, with any bureaucracies of what's going on, how do you even begin with that? I find that in schools, I'm in the Bronx, New York, and I came down here, and that students aren't, they check their phones at the door. So how do you begin with this? In your emerging markets, we actually have the technology, yet still they aren't allowed to use it.
Who would want to respond? Dr. Smah, do
Okay,
you want to get started?
I can. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
It's
mic.
already with me. Thank you. Again, I think let me refer to what my colleague was saying earlier on. There's a question of attitude. And this, I believe, ties into what the dreams individuals have about their future, about where they want to go, about how to realize those dreams. From Nigeria's experience, I've said that the university certificate is very significant. And so that provides the source of motivation, that no one claims to have read or is a graduate until he goes to the university. So whereas in some places you might have some slow pace of interest and participation and so on, here we have huge gap. We have very huge gap. If you take away, let's say 400,000 from 1.8 million, that is 1.4 million people every year desiring to enter the university, I think that provides enough motivation. So it is, how do we really study the various situations around the world to be able to understand what those cross-cutting issues are that require perhaps collaboration, because partnership, I believe, solves a lot of problems. So if in New York, for example, you don't have this kind of zeal, this kind of commitment, this kind of appetite for university or higher education, elsewhere, there are a lot of, because again, it is an entry point to jobs. So perhaps here you don't need those jobs, you don't need those certificates out there. Those certificates are actually so much in demand, to the extent that is even the pressure for it, makes children to find ways of cheating, find ways of breaking the codes of learning and so on to be able to have a certificate. So I think that we need to understand the varieties or the variations that looms large in various contexts, and then respond adequately. That way, I think we'll be solving the problems. Perhaps what to do in New York, for example, may be different from what to do in Africa.
Thank you. I wanted to add here too, if part of your question was that, if phones need to be checked out before entering, I think, my world is more adult government practitioners and so on, but even there, I think the facilitator or the teacher enablement is going to be key as to which tools to use productively in a classroom setting. And maybe we haven't been able to do it, but it's the carrot and the stick, right? He talked about the carrot. The stick is that email is not enabled, but some of the other things are enabled, that allows you to use technology appropriately, mediated and facilitated by instructors or experts. I want to see if any
I just
Dr.
thought,
Banerjee.
since you mentioned the word empowerment, what was on my playing on my mind was empowerment is when we start by helping a child in the classroom to choose the assignment that they want to answer, work on. The method. For example, I'm telling you that when you talk about use of technology in a classroom, one of the example is in higher learning, in higher institutions, there's a concept of bring your own device. So any smart device you can plug and play and you learn and it's very interactive. But coming to school, research has proven that there is an attention deficit disorder that because of the technology happening, students' attention is very much diverted. So not just using the same mobile phone into the classroom setting. For example, in France, some of the schools have even banned use of mobile within the classroom. So it's a very big question. I don't want to get into that aspect. But the empowerment is not just bringing technology into the classroom. Empowerment is a way of life. Empowerment is, are the teachers listening to the needs of the students? And then possibly having a partnership in teaching learning process, where you come together in the process of learning. Because it cannot be one way, then it's going to be teaching. And when you empower, they are student-driven, student-centric, and I think the knowledge sharing and received is much more when there is empowerment within the classroom.
And I think how many of you here have heard about the Hole in the Wall project? Really, so it is, as also Dr. Small said, it is the passion and the need for the learners, which were, computers were embedded in a slum, and children found their way to that and learned to read and write and simple math through no active learning, but through their power of choice and through their need for that. So I think there has to be, as in everything, a balance of some freedom of choice and empowerment, and also some measures to restrict it when it's not being used appropriately. Any other questions?
Can I just,
sure.
Yeah, and I think picking up on Sam's point about it being very different in different contexts. So the woman that I talked about from Bangladesh, I mean, her story is all about empowerment, but it's very, because she was able to develop relatively simple skills in a short period of time, in the context of what's being talked about here, which then enabled her to generate income, which then meant she could choose to go back to school, but also she can choose to grow a business. And in all our projects, we have measures of empowerment, because it's, I agree, it's a way
Absolutely.
of life, but that's very different to what goes on in the New York context, I'm sure.
And the Facebook example is
and
certainly
in fact,
very interesting.
If I could add to this, that if you look at India, because that has been my, one of the areas that I'm focusing on, the, choice of adapting English as a medium has been one of the most positive things that has led India to get so much of opportunities world over. So it has been a very well thought, within the policies. So I think some of these things we need to learn, that what government policy should be there, how much of empowerment is needed. So it has to be more eclectic and much more, gestalt, rather than just using one of the medium to make an impact.
It's a magic in the mix. Any
Yes.
other questions? Please go ahead. Introduce yourself kindly.
Hi, I'm Rahul. My question is for Terry. And I think you mentioned about 3 initiatives, and one of them was about skills and demand. I think the whole room will agree that partnerships and relationships are very important. And one partner which is often missing out in our conversation is the employer itself. And when we talk about emerging economies, employability and livelihood is very critical. So my question to you is, what kind of examples or models you have seen in terms of building partnerships with the employers themselves? Thank you.
Yes, so for that model, for the TVET institutes with whom we already had relationships, so we've already been building their capability in flexible learning, we invited proposals, and the number one criterion was that they needed to go out and find an industry partner. So we ran a workshop for those who were interested to help build their confidence in that, because I think, you know, the cultural differences mean that sometimes there's fear or distrust between academic institutions and industry, so then they came. And what was thrilling for me when I was in these project design workshops last month, where we had the industry people and the academic institutions co-designing the project based on the skill demands of the industry partners, you know, which they identified in the workshop process. You could see that the academic people were thrilled because they know that this is really what they're about. You know, it's their reason for existing, and they felt like they were on the path to doing a good job. So that's why I come back to investing in relationships, not infrastructure. Oh. Part of the rationale for the model is that we use the physical infrastructure that is in the workplace rather than have to replicate it in every TVET institute in countries like Nigeria, where there's just not the funds to do that. And even in New Zealand, where I'm from, the government is restructuring the whole TVET system, partly because that sort of model is not sustainable in a developed world. But it takes time, and you have to do that. One of the things in Africa is that there's this long history of informal apprenticeships. So they're already training people without getting certificates, and there's some challenges around the physical infrastructure. But it's, I guess one of the things that struck me just this morning talking is that we have to start with what there is, you know, and we can't bring in this very sophisticated system from the West into an environment where it won't work for multiple reasons, but also to build on what is really working well in those countries already. And that's part of what we're trying to do in terms of the industry connections. We also have a couple of projects that are with formal employers in the mining industry, but a lot of it's around this informal sector, in urban settings, but informal.
And what comes to mind is I had a recent visit from Minerva University. I don't know how many of you are aware, but they're building it all around these industry connections, even in the West and other countries where it's really only a year of a 4-year undergrad where you are studying somewhat academically. The rest of it is all industry apprenticeship and feedback, but not just in one continent, but multiple continents, so that you get the globalization experience.
Yes, I wanted to add that the Nigerian experience, particularly where the sideways system is a federal government scheme, and this scheme requires the industry to partner with universities, polytechnics, and colleges of education to ensure the success of this placement to the students over the period of 6 months for university students. So indeed, the industry partners, industry sector is very key to the success of connecting opportunities and also trying to transform theoretical knowledge gained in the classrooms and other forms of learning outcomes into practical hands-on. So even the Emerging Age Center, our Center for Technology-Enhanced Learning, which is built for official launch perhaps by the end of this month, still has an important place for industry partners. Where I coordinate the activities is to be able to bring partners into play. The programs cannot really effectively succeed without input from the industry in terms of even designing courses, in terms of content development, in terms of what their input from experiences, from practicals may need to be incorporated in designing these courses. So it's very, very important that the industry partners are part of the whole process of learning, particularly where students ought to go and spend a few months in a particular place be able to learn the rudiments of work and also learn how to handle equipment and some other related skills. So this is very key. So the two examples I have given with respect to the SIWES and with respect to ESITEL, which is the Technology Enhanced Learning Center, all of them emphasize internship, and this internship cannot work. In fact, the International Advisory Board of all the ACEs must include not only professional academics and agencies, but also industry partners. They have key roles to play in defining the scope, in defining the nature and the structure of the programs that will be mounted for access in process of learning.
Dr. Banerjee, did you
Yeah,
want to add something?
I think it's a very pertinent question that has been asked. So I was trying to talk about that inclusive, education. So there are 3 more I's in it in terms of innovation in curriculum design, which, like he also mentioned, that you need to bring industry into the designing of the curriculum, the way forward, the kind of products and processes required in the industry. The second I is for industry integration. So for example, they're paying a part of your board of studies, then you are part about bringing them together for industry immersion projects, and also in the case of patenting and commercializing those patents. For example, say what we are doing at the university, the kind of patents that they are filing along with faculty and people, we have industry partners who partner with them and help in commercialization. And the third I is, of course, internationalization. So unless you bring the global community together, so I think the 3 I's for inclusiveness, I feel, are very critical in this particular, and the answer is, I think that's what we are heading towards, bringing the world together in one space as much as possible.
And this reminds me, I mean, the industry partnership doesn't have to be gigantic industry or well-branded.
Yeah.
A small example comes to mind where we met recently at a UN conference was this company in this organization, NGO in the Sundarbans, which is one of the remote areas in Calcutta, where they are training young women on different aspects of graphic design and things like that to support some of the selfless car driving initiatives in Western countries. So how can the machine detect a human versus a dog versus something else on the road and these kinds of things. So that's really connecting to the 4th Industrial Revolution by building the skills in emerging countries of relatively uneducated girls and giving them an opportunity for a livelihood. So I think we need to be thinking very creatively about these industry partnerships.
Just one more point I'd make is that these informal sector relationships, those people need to keep working because they can't afford to take time off to study full time. So this is not about a university course with a little work placement. This is about people working and then using the skills that they are developing in the workplace to contribute to certificates. So it's, to me, it's turning it, it's a flipped workplace maybe.
And it's a plug for digital learning because you can do that while you work and for those who can't afford.
And deals with this other challenge that we haven't really touched on where everybody needs to keep reskilling for their whole lives.
Yes. I saw another hand somewhere in the back.
Well,
yes, please.
I just wanted to offer just one more example. At the Chinoa University of Technology in Zimbabwe, the students are required to successfully serve a 9-month internship with industry as part of their degree. And if they fail the internship, well, they have to repeat it. They can't graduate. So I don't know how prevalent that is in Africa and other developing nations.
Sam, did you want to address the African context?
Yes. Like I said earlier, the university system structures six months of internship into the curriculum. So when you get to a particular level, it's required that you stay away for 6 months. For polytechnics, it's 4 months, and for colleges of education, 3 months, for all those practical hands-on courses. Of course, the university also can determine which other courses can feasibly participate in the sideways. Now, it is very true that if you fail your sideways, then you repeat it. And if you do badly, when your supervisors come for supervision, if you have a bad report from your industry supervisor, when the university supervisors come and then they cannot get a proper feedback mechanism, you fail, and you have to repeat it. So that is very straightforward, and everybody knows about that. So I think the key here is to emphasize the cooperation between the university entities as well as the industry partners. Each professional group is brought also into the picture. For example, a course that requires going into a bakery, okay? A bakery will require the Nigerian Consultative or Nigerian, for a forum specifically for those professional lines. They need to be informed, they need to prepare. The students who come, they might seek placement, they need your cooperation. For part of the assessment template that we have requires the submission of a well-written and signed letter by the director representing the university, requesting agencies, entities, like you said, Sheila, even if they are very small-scale businesses, they are also very, very important in the informal sector, very great drivers of the economic development of emerging economies. So they need that involvement, and it is officialized, it is made public, so they make a commitment also to support the students while he or she is on the scheme. And at the end of the day, they have to write a confidential report, which also has a proportion of score that accumulates to define the final score rate, whether the student has passed and at what level. So it is very important for that cooperation to be established.
Did any of one of you want to add to an example, or should we move on to
I think it's fine. I think
Okay.
we're understood.
So while you think of another question, I'm going to ask the panelists a question for all of them to respond as they see fit. Data and learning analytics and evaluations are critical. Can you share with us initiatives that you have in place where you're using such learning analytics to course correct, to plan the next offering, and even benchmark your initiative with other successful initiatives?
Okay.
So,
let me start with our annual 5-yearly evaluation. This 5-yearly evaluation ensures that each course material, each course content undergoes a review. And the university prepares for it. Of course, we have accreditation from the National Universities Commission. They also ensure that the content is contemporary enough, the content is brought to bear with the happenings, at the moment. So each of these courses are subjected to evaluation in terms of content analysis to ensure that examples, illustrations, even in terms of the viability of learning tools like audio visuals and other devices, all of them are put through the process of evaluation to ensure that course content is contemporary enough. Now, in terms of this process of evaluation, we have various organs of the university that play specific roles, like the Directorate of Academic Planning ensures that the whole process is carried on as at when due. So each time a course is due or a program is due for evaluation, arrangements are made to ensure that quality assurance is taking over each of those courses to ensure that they are quite relevant at the moment. So yes, those processes exist, those institutional mechanisms exist, and they actually facilitate the evaluation of those courses and give reports as to where improvement needs to be made and where replacement also needs to be made to ensure that learning is really relevant to what is happening.
Yeah, I think I just thought of bringing up the, the Levinian field theory, where you need to unlearn, move and relearn. That is one of the examples today that we are facing in institutions of higher learning, where you need to make a change from the very traditional methods of teaching and learning. So if you look at assessment per se, whether you're using a clicker software in the classroom where I know in the last room who is not attentive or who is answering the quiz properly. So you're also trying to understand the pace of learning. So it's very important that today in this digital era, you get to set a different pace for different learners. So you can have slow learners, you can have people who are fast and they get different level of, the difficulty level of problems that they're able to solve. So there I feel technology has a role to play, but again I want to emphasize the role of teachers are becoming even more important because they are handling all of this. So they are not only preparing themselves for the classes, but they are also trying to come out with the best methods of assessment so that they don't go wrong. And so here I think the continuous evaluation is becoming more critical today, and people are using it much more than an end-term assessment examination, where it's more of rote learning and other things. So I think there is a change that we see, but it is a combination of many things together. So not completely online or digital assessment, but there are a lot of experiential learning projects. For a student, for example, they go to an industry, they learn something, come back, or they go to a hospital, do a clinical trial and come back. So that experiential learning should also be assessed. So then the role of mentor-mentee system will become very important.
Absolutely, and I think the more informal and experiential learning is where the real learning happens, and so there has to be a continuous monitoring and evaluation process, not just to course correct, but also to learn from that. Terry, did you want to add?
Yeah, so the Commonwealth of Learning has a number of MOOCs, and we collect learner analytics from those. But the main approach that we use, and I quoted some of the learnings from that, is where we evaluate projects more broadly than learner analytics. And quite a few of most of our partners don't necessarily even have learning management systems in place, let alone sort of more sophisticated analytics options. So we certainly try and tap into whatever our partners are collecting in our evaluation processes, but it's not necessarily highly technological, and often it's an extra demand that we put on them where they feed data into our own systems.
And a lot of times in those cases, like the Facebook example you gave, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So if the candidate, the learner, has learned enough to have a productive livelihood, what other evaluation do you need?
Well, and that's what we're trying to focus on,
Exactly.
evaluate, because that's what we're really
The
there to
application,
achieve.
right?
Yeah.
Wanted to end with one question on emerging and disruptive technologies. At the World Bank, we are really looking at Internet of Things, AI, and other tools, and see how those can help emerging countries leapfrog in every sector, in health, in transport, in city management, and so on. So I'd like to hear from the panelists. So I'll start off by saying in the field of learning and capacity building, I've started to use AI to develop chatbots, which is like the first entry point where a learner in a self-paced digital environment is interacting with a chatbot to ask the question. And the beauty of this is that the more the learner interacts with the bot learns and becomes more intelligent. So that's one thing we're starting. And the second one, which came through in our conversation of motivation and all of that, is what's in it for me? I mean, that's what keeps the learner most engaged. And we are working with some of the leading developers on adaptive learning to create some personalized learning paths for learners that's really relevant to them. What I'm finding is things are still, the technology is there, but it's still expensive to design. So instead of having one curriculum, as we normally do in digital learning, we have to create 5 or 6 different types of examples and interactivity and participation, which lengthens the design process and cost. So I think those are the challenges we need to overcome, but I'd like to turn it over to the panelists to share what you're doing with the real disruptive technologies for learning.
At the ACTEL, that is Africa Center of Excellence on Technology Enhanced Learning, things are actually at their formative stages. We have developed courses, we developed content, we developed the processes that will lead to software development to enhance all this. So we aren't there yet, so to speak. So hoping that very, very soon we'll be able to work on that and be able to see the contribution that we can make in terms of having those technologies that can enhance learning. It's part of the core mandate of the center. So I think we are working on that for now.
Well, I think it's a very interesting question, but I must tell you that we are not at 100% there. But
no one is.
No
really.
one is. But at the same time, let me tell you that it's something like the war has begun and people have understood the pros and cons of it. But I was thinking that I must tell you that yes, a learning management system is a must, so which everybody is using. And we are not creating, but there is disruption that is happening all the time. But I was really thinking about your Alexas and other things which you're constantly using, where the technology is understanding you and artificially they basically get to know you more than you do about your own self. And we are moving into that era. So what I have noticed that in a case study where the school children, their behavior in adapting disruptive technologies much faster than when you go into the higher learning space of a scholar who is coming back from industry into your classroom, especially for executive education. The pace is different, right? But at the same time that companies today are coming together, so there's also industry integration. For example, the hospitals where they are working on, say, clinical research, they are coming out with the data and that data is being utilized. So there is, within the classroom, the industry is coming into the classroom and that's where you are getting the information at almost on real time. At the OT, the operation theater, the surgery is going on and within the real time you're getting the data and that's where people are working on and understanding, analyzing the issues, the cases. And the other aspect which I'm looking at is that are we ready enough? Because that's a very big question. So there I wanted to talk about in this aspect about sharing of resources, because we cannot expect, maybe yes, Amity as a large university can have resources to start up digital labs. We have a lot of MOOCs courses. For example, IIT Bombay and Amity University, we run some programs together, so they are able to, even students are able to utilize. Even the one of the UMass and Amity Gurgaon, we have set up a classroom within our own campus where our students of engineering are able to interact, and it's a very, very smart class with almost everything, all interactions happening. But every small institution cannot do it. So I think the answer is in having collaborative efforts. We can have large organizations, I think already World Bank and all of the other people who are interested in working together, so that we can bring in more people into that same classroom. I have 60-seater classroom, I can have 5 from another institution coming into the same classroom, and that is one way of bringing in a more inclusive learning.
And I think we didn't get an opportunity to talk about peer learning, but that's the powerful Well, actually, it's the technology, the appropriate ed tech that enables peer learning, not even within classrooms in your same location, but across the globe and so on. And I think that's the trend that we are yet to leverage better. But Terry, did you want to add to this?
So I think, as you can tell from the examples that I gave, Cole is very focused on sort of on-the-ground interventions that actually make a difference to people's lives, and don't want to preempt the opportunity to leapfrog in some ways. But our disruptive technologies tend to be very pragmatic. So one of the things that we have developed is a thing called Aptus, which is a small box, but you can put a whole lot of, like you can put Moodle and the whole of Wikipedia and other open source software on there, and you can put specifically developed learning materials. And so you can have it in a physical space, and it means that learners in quite a large radius don't need to use data to access digital learning. And so we are using that. So for example, in Donald's situation, where you've got 600 master craftspersons and apprentices wanting to learn the same thing, but they're in the same physical place. It's a massive hunk of dirt with a whole lot of derelict vehicles on it, but it's the same physical space. That's part of the design, that they will use that device. We also have developed MOOCit, which is some software around MOOCs, and I'm sorry I'm not knowledgeable enough to talk any more about that. And I think there was a third one, but I've forgotten it.
Well, we're exactly on time, so that's great. Thank you for being a wonderful audience with lots of questions. I'd like to end with maybe a show of hands and a vote. We talked about the SDG 4, which is inclusive and equitable education for every child and youth in the world. And we looked at the SDG challenges that exist, and we explored the idea of using educational technology and smart partnerships to help us meet these challenges. So how many of you believe, going back to my first slide, the two young ladies, 3-year-old, that they will get an equitable education using many of the experiences and tools that we talked about?
We all feel safe.
And thanks for organizations like Sailor to help us facilitate this conversation and move the needle forward. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
It was a great panel, very informative.
Thank you.
Lots of great different perspectives. We all came together around the same theme. So again, lunch will be ready in about 5 or 10 minutes, so feel free to network, and I'm sure you have some individual panels going to meet, and we'll see you over there. Yes. Oh, one more thing. Hold on. Terry's got one more point.
Terry's remembering.
Go ahead, Terry.